You've examined aggregate demand and aggregate supply. It's now time to put those concepts together to see how their interaction determines a short-run macroeconomic equilibrium. Now, just to review, your aggregate demand curve is going to be a downward sloping curve reflecting an inverse relationship between the general price level and real GDP or output. And that inverse relationship between the general price level and real GDP can be due to a number of factors. For example, as the price level falls, the buying power of your wealth will increase. And that increase in buying power will cause you to increase your consumption of goods and services. And hence, aggregate demand will have increased. Also, keep in mind that your aggregate supply curve is upward sloping, so that your aggregate supply curve indicates that there's a direct relationship between the general price level and real GDP or output. In this case, the rise in the price level can increase firms' profits. Typically, the costs for the firm are fixed, they don't change very much, and as the price level rises, it's more profitable to produce goods. And because it's more profitable to produce goods, firms increase production, aggregate supply, in other words, increases. So now let's put these two concepts together. We have our downward sloping aggregate demand curve and our upward sloping aggregate supply curve, and we're in equilibrium where those two curves intersect. And so in equilibrium, we have our equilibrium price level, let's call it PL0, and we have our equilibrium level of output, as represented by RGDP subscript 0. And this is equilibrium because at this price level, the quantity of goods and services that consumers, businesses, government want to purchase will exactly equal the aggregate output for the economy. And so everything that all the businesses want to produce is going to be consumed by the various sectors of the economy. Now, what happens that allows this economy to move into equilibrium? What happens if initially the price level is above the equilibrium price level, or what happens if the price level is initially below the equilibrium price level? So we have a price level now, PL star, that's above the equilibrium price level. And as you look at your diagram, you can see at that price level, the quantity of goods and services in aggregate that households, businesses, and government want to purchase is going to be below the output level that businesses want to produce. So in this situation, businesses are producing goods that they are unable to sell. And there's this unintended increase in inventory. Businesses are having the stock of goods and services lying on their shelves increase, and they want to get rid of that. And so what those businesses do is they start lowering prices. And as price level falls, as this occurs throughout the economy, other businesses experience lower profits. Their costs are roughly the same, but now they're getting less money for the goods and services they produce because the general price level has fallen. And therefore they have less incentive to produce output, and the amount of goods and services being produced therefore decreases. But on the other hand, as that price level falls, consumers are now finding that their real wealth has increased. Their assets have greater purchasing power. And because the real wealth increased, we now find that consumers are willing to purchase more. So aggregate demand's increasing. So as that price level is falling to its equilibrium level, PL0, aggregate supply and aggregate demand are adjusting to its equilibrium level at RGDP subscript 0. And we're back in an equilibrium because now aggregate demand equals aggregate supply. Now let's consider what will happen if price level initially is below the equilibrium price level. So in a situation where the price level is below the equilibrium level, we have a price level again such as P star. And at P star, we now have a situation where aggregate supply is less than aggregate demand. So aggregate supply is less than aggregate demand means that households, businesses, government want to purchase more goods and services than businesses are providing. And businesses now are experiencing an unintended decrease in their inventories. Their inventories are getting very low. And because their inventories are getting very low, there's upward pressure on prices. So the price level is going to start rising. And as the price level starts rising, you now have a situation where businesses are becoming more profitable. With their relatively sticky cost of production and now a higher price, their profits are higher, and therefore those businesses have incentive to produce more output. And so we see an increase in the aggregate output for this economy. But that higher price level is not working out so well for our consumers. Their real wealth is decreasing. The assets they have now have lower purchasing power. And because the purchasing power of those assets have decreased, aggregate demand is decreasing. And now both aggregate supply and aggregate demand are moving towards their intersection, or moving towards their equilibrium at the price level PL0 and at the level of real GDP associated with our GDP subscript 0. And the economy is again automatically adjusted back to an equilibrium where aggregate demand equals aggregate supply. Now it's time to apply this concept to situations for Econoland.